I don't think they like the government either a whole lot. And the second theme is that, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, the second theme is that the Greek industry would like to change its placement in the United States market, and that they would like to move away from the bulk market, sending their oil to Italy, and brand it more as Greek olive oil, as Sakis was talking about. So these two themes seem to be unconnected to one another, and they seem to be in competition with one another. But I want to submit to you that the center approach, the partnership approach, could be a way to accommodate both of these dimensions of your country. And so I'd like to discuss that a little bit with you. So first, I'd like to give you some indication of the placement of two Greek products in the supermarket in the United States. First, let's take Kalamata olives. Kalamata olives are very popular with the American consumer. It's a great product, it's a high-quality product, and there is nothing like it of the table olives that are available to Americans. I mean, it's just a uniquely high-quality, great product that just speaks of Greece. Greek olive oil, on the other hand, does not have such a reputation in the United States. And Professor Maniatis had addressed this to some extent. Of the 11 samples that he pulled and analyzed with his collaborator, Dr. Eleni Meliou, they found that 10 of the samples failed the standards for extra virgin. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I think. Yeah, we're good. So here's a picture of the olive oil shelf, very similar to what Sakis had shown. And there's not very much of a profile for Greek olive oil, even when you can find it. And I think Dr. Maniatis had tried with Dr. Meliou to find as many examples of Greek olive oil in the American supermarkets as they could. But you really don't see it as a very high profile. And when you do see it, and this is actually a recent development, you will see it in two forms. One is the branded olive oil, which is the Pompeian on the left, and they actually have the varietal Korodeiki. And the second main way to present Greek oil is through the private label of the supermarket, which is the example on the right. And so in that situation, they have a Greek oil, a Spanish oil, an Italian oil, and a California oil in that series. And I've noticed that that is happening in a lot of supermarkets in the United States. But this is only a recent development, and these are probably not particularly high volume selling brands. And so how do you get to the goal that I mentioned at the beginning, to try to get a high quality Greek olive oil on the shelf and to compete with the other oil that is primarily sourced from the bulk market in the United States? Most of the olive oil sold in the United States is imported, 97% or so. So the first step, in my view, is that you need to embrace quality, so that 10 out of 11 samples do not fail a sensory panel evaluation. And how can you embrace quality? Well, for many farmers, if you're a small farmer, you're not necessarily interested in this export market. But if you're a larger farmer and you're interested in export, you would be interested, and there will need to be some kind of strategy to change what you're doing in this market. And this is the largest import market in the world. So I now want to talk to you about how this olive center model, which is now beginning in Greece, and which is now leading to the partnerships that we have found so successful in the United States, can help in addressing this need of the Greek industry to bring more money into this sector in Greece and to raise the profile of Greek olive oil in the United States, and do so without requiring the Greek farmer to do something that the Greek farmer does not want to do. So at our center, and I'm just going to show you some pictures for the most part of how we operate in our center, we have adopted the slogan that we would like to do for olives what UC Davis did for wine. And what UC Davis did for wine was working with the industry to transform California wine from a fairly low-quality product that was traditionally just sweet wines that were very inexpensive to among the world's best wine growing regions in the, and ones that are considered some of the best wines in the world. So we adopted as our slogan, and we tried to be aspirational, that we wanted to do more for olives than what was happening at the current time when we started, and we really wanted to have an impact that would reach across the world. So here's a picture of where the center is located. It's the Robert Mondavi Institute for Wine and Food Science. An indication when you hear the name Robert Mondavi, he was the largest private donor for this whole complex of buildings to be built. And these buildings were housed the Food Science Department, the Viticulture and Enology Department, and the Olive Center and other centers, including the Robert Mondavi Institute, where we are residing. So it's a beautiful new complex, and it started, it opened up at the moment that we started in 2008. Here's a picture of when we announced our reception and our launch of our center. And in this picture, there are a number of people from the university, but there's also a number of people from the California olive industry, including table olives and olive oil, all in the same picture. In California, I don't know if that has ever occurred before this night, where you had people from the olive sector, table olive sector, and the olive oil sector in the same room talking to one another. So from the very first day that we got started, we were having an impact. And the idea behind the center is not that we needed the government to help us form the center, and not that we needed a lot of funding to get this formed, but simply that we talked to people at the university who were either already working in olives in some discipline, whether it was olive growing or olive processing or chemistry or agricultural engineering. And we asked them, do you want to be part of our center? And we got 35 people from the university to say yes. And that group of 35 people we packaged together as the UC Davis Olive Center. It didn't cost us anything to do that packaging. And then we went to the industry and said, we formed this center, and we would like to address your research and education needs. We didn't tell them what we thought their needs should be. We asked them, what could we do that would be helpful to you? And that's an important piece of making this work. We weren't telling them what they needed. They were telling us what they needed. So we went to their processing plants, we went to their orchards, to their festivals, to their annual meetings, and we were reaching out to them and working with them to try to serve them better. And as a public university, we really see our role as public service and really as customer service to the industry. So here's a picture of when we brought a number of people together for strategic planning. And we wanted to get the industry's views on what their research priorities would be for, say, a 3-year to 5-year period. And we brought together the table olive sector and the olive oil sector. And what we found in a very quick series of 2 meetings, and the 2 meetings lasted maybe a total of 6 hours, is we've got two important points of consensus from the industry. One was that the growers wanted to get more efficiency out of the orchard. They wanted fewer inputs, such as pesticides, herbicides, irrigation water, and they wanted more productivity. So they wanted to get more value per hectare. And I think that's probably true with growers worldwide. But it was important for us to establish that was a point of consensus for both the olive oil sector and the table olive sector. And then the second point of consensus was that they believed that we needed to do a better job in the United States with our quality standards. And the quality standards that we have, frankly, are weak and they're not enforced. And from the olive oil side, which is a small sector of the consumption in the United States, and in addition, it's a very small sector of California agriculture, they felt that the laws, the standards that were in place were simply not enforced, that the standards were not very good, and when they were trying to compete in the marketplace with this grade of extra virgin, they were finding it was difficult for them to price their product, which was generally of high quality, in a way that was competitive with the product coming into our market. And what we found when we studied the quality, when we went to the supermarket, similar to the study that Dr. Magnatas described, we found that 65% of the imported oil that was labeled as extra virgin did not meet that standard. So the domestic industry was saying that we feel that we are competing against low-quality product, and we think that there needs to be a level playing field so that everybody is competing at the same standard of quality. From the table olive side, they don't even have really any standards. As weak as the olive oil standards are, there are very few standards for table olives. They grade the olives based on size and whether they have cosmetic defects, but not really on any chemical quality. And the sensory quality, when it's inspected by the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the sensory standard that they use is that the olives have to have reasonably good flavor, which is not a very easy standard to enforce because it is so vague. So this is a picture of when we've gone to their festivals and we're meeting them, and we actually were serving some of our products. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. So in the 6 years since we got started, here are the deliverables that Sakis had mentioned. First, we've delivered 50 research projects in 6 years without having to go solely to the industry for funding or solely to the government for funding. Many of those projects we funded out of our own resources, but from some extent we had some support from the industry and some from the government. Here's one example. This is a table olive orchard that was managed for mechanical harvesting. It's a high-density orchard. The trees were pruned to form a hedgerow, and it's very difficult with this variety to get the fruit off the tree with a shaker because it's Manzanillo, and it's a variety that really hangs onto the tree, particularly when it's green. We've been studying this for more than 5 years, and we now have a prototype that will get more than 80% removal and be very efficient in removing these olives without damaging the fruit and making them of good quality for processing. We're also looking at improving processing, and here's an example of a professor, Maria Marco, with some graduate students. She's a microbiologist who has been looking at a defect that is occurring in these fermented olives. They're not quite like Kalamata olives. They're a different variety. They're picked green. But it's a small portion of the California table olive sector, maybe 10%. And she's finding the cause for these defects and helping the producers find a solution when they are managing their process. And that's a process that's been really guided by tradition rather than by science for its entire history in California. We are looking at improving the quality standards to get back to the strategic consensus that the industry told us they wanted us to address. And this is our research director, Dr. Selena Wang, who's a PhD in organic chemistry. And she's trying to help us figure out better ways to find and assess the quality and the authenticity of olive oil and table olives, and coming up with methods that are faster, better, and cheaper than the existing methods that have been adopted in international standards. We have established a sensory panel, which you have here now in Kalaamata, and we visited that panel earlier today. In my opinion, I think that's a very important development for the industry here, because you really need to know, as producers, as farmers, how to taste the product. And you're in a global economy. Whatever you may think is good quality, they may not think in an export country, they may not have the same point of view. And so these sensory panels help provide an independent blind tasting and evaluation with trained tasters to give you an honest assessment of the quality of your oil. It's very important, and it can help you become a better processor and a better farmer. We've also looked at the consumer and evaluated what they know and like about table olives and olive oil in California. And for example, what we found in this study, and all this information you can look up on our website, it's all available for free. We found that the California consumer, actually the U.S. consumer, this was a nationwide survey, ranked flavor and health as the top criteria for buying olive oil, which goes back to what Procopius was saying about you have the inherent healthy attributes in your olives in this region, where you may need some additional room for improvement is in the flavor of the oil, at least in the United States. So this is important information for the industry. Those are the research projects. Like I said, 50 research projects. We also provide education. And because we have a multidisciplinary center with those 35 faculty and others, we're able to touch upon a lot of different areas of research and education. This is one of our more popular research or educational programs. Every year, right at the beginning of the harvest season, we have an olive oil milling course. And this year it'll be a 4-day course. We bring in a top expert from the largest producer in Australia. And these folks are way ahead of California in assessing, based on testing and data, the quality and the extraction efficiency of their operation. They don't make decisions based on tradition. They don't make decisions based on how they're feeling one day. They look at the data, and it shows you what the chemical quality is, what the sensory quality is. They analyze the oil that's coming out of the mill. They analyze the oil that is left in the pumice to look at their extraction efficiency. And they have benchmarks to guide what they do in their operation. We look at educating the media. If I had the time, it would be great to educate every consumer in America, but with such a large country, we have to aim for the people who are going to educate the consumers for us. So we talk to media and engage them and not try to separate ourselves from them just because we're at the university. So this is a picture in New York City of the Hearst Publication Group, which is a major media publishing group of a number of popular magazines in the United States. And we were helping them taste through a number of California oils and actually United States oils. There's some production outside of California to just appreciate the varietal differences and the regional differences that they can get in the domestic olive oil. We're looking at educating policymakers, and in the course of our 6 years, we've been able to get 3 bills passed through the California legislature. One of the bills provided a permanent funding source for olive tree research, and that goes on a tax on new olive tree sales, a 1% tax, funds research into perpetuity. And then we're also educating opinion leaders out in the food industry, because they are also going to influence the consumer. The chefs, the restaurants, the hotels, schools, wherever you get high volume food service, they can really have an impact on what consumers will later buy for themselves. So those are the education and research activities, but we also really enjoy partnerships, not just within the university and within California with our industry, but outside the industry. And so here is a picture of Dr. Milieu and Dr. Mayades, along with our esteemed senior consultant, Ed Frankel, the gentleman who is 86 years old, who's one of the top lipid chemists in the world, one of the most widely cited. He is helping us out in his long career, a 60-year career. He's helping us out with olive oil and table olives. And then we also have Dr. Antonio Carretero from the University of Granada, who has been working on the olive mill byproducts, which is an interest of Dr. Gertzis. Whoops, wrong direction. Hey, speaking of Dr. Gertzis, he came and visited us and wandered through our orchard. This is a calamone tree that we planted in a row in our orchard. They grow very well in California. I'm not sure that we can duplicate the flavor that you have mastered here, but we're just experimenting with these research orchards and seeing what varieties do well, what kind of pressure do you get from pests and diseases. We've planted 2 hectares of orchards that we use for this purpose, but we also use it to make our own olive oil. And we are a self-funded center, which is unusual. I'm sure it's an unusual dynamic in Greece and other parts of Europe. It's actually very unusual in California that you have a self-funded center like ours. The university gave us 50,000 euros as seed money to get this center started. And they apportioned that money out over 3 years. So roughly 17,000 euros a year was what we had to work with. So we had to find another way to get some revenue. And luckily, the university had an olive oil production program that I had been involved with in the preceding couple of years. And so we produce our own olive oil and we sell it on the campus, as well as some other products that we get donated to us from California producers. And with just these products, selling these just at the bookstore at our campus, it supplies 40% of my net revenue that we use for our operating costs. 40%. The rest of the money we get from our short courses, those educational events, probably 25% from those, from fees, and then another 25% from research grants, and the last 10% is a combination of fees we charge for sensory and chemical analysis and just donations. So we're a self-funded center. So this concept, I think, could work here in Greece, and it won't work exactly the way I've described it in California. It's a different culture. It's a much bigger industry. It's an industry with thousands and thousands of farmers and perhaps mills as well. I don't know how many mills you have. From our standpoint, we have just a very manageable industry. It's a small industry in California. It's growing rapidly. It's grown by tenfold in the last 10 years. But it's a very manageable size for us. So you're going to have to take your own conditions and figure out amongst yourselves what will work. But in my view, what would make the most sense is not to try to organize all the thousands and thousands of pieces of the industry, because I think it would be fruitless to try to get everyone to get on the same page and agree on a certain course of action. I think what would make more sense is to look first at the more motivated producers, the ones that do want to reach out to this import sector in the United States, and see if they can increase their profile of Greek oil. And maybe these motivated producers decide together that they are going to adopt the code of practice that applies to every member of their coalition. and they're going to require that the oil meets certain chemical and sensory parameters. You don't need the government to do that. I think producers can do that on their own, although maybe the government would stick their hand in it here in Greece. Seems like that might happen, but that's a possibility. But you would have to figure it out really based on your own conditions. And if you do it that way, you're not requiring anybody to do something they don't want to do. They're doing it voluntarily. And that's the way it happens. That's the way it works in California. Nobody has to work with us, not even the professors. They only work with us if we have something to provide them. And what really makes it work for the university is we bring in the research project, the professor, then we can go to whoever that expert is and say, we've got some money for this project. I've never had a professor turn me down when we brought in research money, because then they can mentor a graduate student, and that graduate student can do the research, and then the research can be published, and then the graduate student gets a diploma, and that's the way it works at the university. So we're helping people at the university out, but nobody has to work with us. It's a model that really is rather simple, but it works. So now, you might have some objections here in considering this model. Greeks are argumentative, right? You might have some concerns about this. Maybe you think, well, you know, the industry doesn't really work with the academic sector. We don't have that kind of tradition here. Although you've seen some examples where it's beginning with my friends here up on stage. So there's a sense that maybe something can happen. And there might be the concern that, well, you know, the industry here in Greece is very diverse, and we've got different regions who don't necessarily have the same interests. Well, maybe those regions could form their own coalitions and really work together to support their own product. But I'll tell you, in California and in the United States, there's a long tradition of commodity groups who are independent people, who don't necessarily like one another, who are driving by each other's orchards and seeing whether the orchard looks any good, and seeing if their neighbor is doing a good job, and then they go down to the coffee shop and talk about one another. And so they don't like each other, they don't necessarily want to get along with each other, but they have seen where when they band together in an area where they have a mutual interest, where it's going to support the common interest that they have for their industry so that they can earn more money, even these independent people in California who don't much like government or like anybody probably here, they see the merit of banding together and funding some joint areas of promotion or research. So that's very common. So my advice as you get started here, and as this center is getting off the ground here in Greece, what we found was effective was we wanted to get a quick victory. We did not want to announce we had an olive center and then nothing happened for months or years. We wanted, for our credibility, to show that we can get something done. And in our case, what we got done very quickly was to get new standards adopted for California for olive oil, which were the first update of olive oil standards in California in 60 years. And the industry on their own had thought about trying to do this for 10 years, and they didn't know how to do it. But my background was working in the legislature, and I advised them how to do it. And we got it done. And that might not be a traditional university role, but from my standpoint, we wanted to show them that UC Davis could help them get something done that they wanted to get done that had broad support in the industry. Small producers and large producers all wanted to get those standards updated. So we helped them do it, and it made us a lot of friends, and then it gave us the credibility to do other things. And the second piece of advice I would provide is to find key allies of the motivated, of the ones that are open to change. Don't try to persuade those who are doing well with the system that they have. There's no incentive to change if you're not going to have the promise of some kind of reward, because to invest in quality and to invest in marketing, which you would also need to be effective in the U.S. market, it costs money. And it doesn't make sense for a grower to spend more money if they're not going to get more money in return through a higher price for their product or whatever they can get more money at. So find the key allies and the people who, despite the ones who might not agree with the concept or might be skeptical of the concept, those are the people, those allies who can stand together and keep pushing forward bit by bit. It's just making progress, and sometimes it's very gradual, but you want to keep making progress. And I'll tell you, despite the positive things that we found in our experience, it hasn't been all a smooth ride. There have been people who have not really supported what we've done, or have felt threatened maybe by us taking a role in this industry. Maybe it was people who already had a role in the industry and they didn't like somebody new coming in. We tried to be sensitive to that, but you know, that's human nature, I think, that people are going to have some problems. And you can't let that derail where you're trying to get to. In our case, we wanted to do for olives what UC Davis did for wine, and we're continuing to move toward that goal. So when faced with those challenges, and just in wrapping up, you're going to have those challenges too. And you gave us Aristotle and all these great philosophers. I'm going to give you a bit of philosophy I just read the other day on Facebook. But it sort of spoke to our experience, and that is that if you really don't want to do something, you will find an excuse. If you really want to do something, you will find a way. And that certainly was the case. When you're faced with challenges, you've got to find a way to keep moving. And with all the challenges that you're facing here in Greece, there are ways to move forward. And I would say another bit of philosophy that has been a guidepost for us was given by the great American writer of the 19th century, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm." And that was absolutely essential for us to kind of persevere through the negative, through the skepticism, through even the university was a little skeptical with us launching this center, because I wasn't a PhD, I wasn't even a product of the university. I came from the legislative arena, and to many people at the university, I was probably kind of like an alien that came down from the sky. So you need to keep some enthusiasm, and we really saw the possibility of UC Davis doing something great and trying to achieve what it achieved with wine. So if you do have the will and you find a way and you keep your enthusiasm and you develop the key allies, then I believe that you have, with this new Olive Center, the possibility of introducing a new era of innovation for an ancient crop. Thank you.